10 tanks that adopted the IS-3's revolutionary turret design. September 7, 1945, Berlin. American and British generals watch 52 Soviet IS-3 tanks roll past during the Allied victory parade. What they see makes them freeze. These tanks don't look like anything in the West. The turret, shaped like an upturned soup bowl, is unlike any tank design they've ever encountered. Intelligence officers frantically sketch diagrams. Within months, every major military power begins studying this revolutionary design. That hemispherical cast turret became the single most influential tank design element of the Cold War. It defined Soviet armor for decades. But here's what nobody talks about. Which tanks actually adopted this design? Which ones copied it? Which ones improved it? And why did the West largely reject it despite its obvious ballistic advantages? The story of the hemispherical turret is the story of how one design choice shaped 40 years of tank development and the surprising reasons it eventually disappeared. Let's start with why the IS-3's turret was revolutionary. The turret was hemispherical, bowl-shaped, larger than the width of the tank itself, with a pronounced tumble-home form, incorporating many angles that greatly improved effective thickness and chances of ricochets. Before the IS-3, tank turrets were boxy or cylindrical with relatively flat surfaces. The problem? Flat armor, even thick flat armor, can be penetrated if you hit it at a right angle. The IS-3's designers, particularly G.V. Kruchenyk, created something different, a flattened hemisphere where almost every surface was curved and sloped. The perimeter armor reached 110 millimeters in the top and 200 millimeters in the bottom, with steep angles at 60 degrees improving the chance of ricochet. Enemy shells would hit this curved surface and glance off instead of penetrating. The effective armor thickness was far greater than the actual thickness because of the angles. It was brilliant defensive design, with one major drawback that we'll get to later. This design became the hallmark of post-war Soviet tanks, with the pike nose also mirrored by other tanks of the IS family, such as the IS-7 and T-10. But which specific tanks adopted this turret philosophy? Let's count them down. Number 10. IS-7. 1948. The IS-3 was the IS-3's bigger, badder brother. Weighing 68 tons and armed with a 130mm S-70 long-barreled gun, it was the largest and heaviest member of the IS family. The turret design directly evolved from the IS-3's hemispherical concept, but scaled up massively to accommodate the huge 130mm naval cannon. Only 3 prototypes were built. Why? The same reason the IS-3 itself struggled. The turret design, while great for protection, was a nightmare for crew ergonomics. The hemispherical shape drastically reduced interior headroom. The loader had to work hunched over. Depression angles were terrible. The IS-7 project was abandoned. Number 9. T-10, 1952. The T-10, initially designated IS-8, was the final development of the IS tank series, with a longer hull, 7 pairs of road wheels instead of 6, a larger turret mounting a new gun with fume extractor. The turret retained the hemispherical concept from the IS-3, but with refinements. It was slightly taller to improve working space and gun depression. The T-10 looked very similar to the IS-3, with a round mushroom head turret, giving the tank a low silhouette. Production ran until 1966, making the T-10 the last heavy tank in Soviet service. The hemispherical turret remained effective for protection, but by the 1960s, ATGMs made heavy tanks obsolete regardless of armor shape.
Number 8. T-54 early models, 1949-1951. Here's where it gets interesting. The T-54 wasn't a heavy tank. It was a medium tank meant to replace the T-34-85. Early models had turrets with problems. The T-54 model 1949 bore some resemblance to the T-44, with undercuts to the front and rear of the turret, featuring a very wide gun mantlet that made the turret vulnerable to enemy fire. But by the T-54 model 1951, the overhang at the rear of the turret was completely removed, giving it a classic hemispherical shape resembling half an eggshell. This wasn't a direct copy of the IS-3's turret. It was smaller, simpler, and designed for a 100mm gun instead of 122mm, but the influence was unmistakable. Soviet designers had learned hemispherical turrets work. The T-54's hemispherical turret became legendary. Its turret was virtually hemispherical in shape, which helped deflect enemy rounds. Over 100,000 T-54-55 tanks would eventually be built with this turret design, making it the most successful application of hemispherical turret philosophy in history. Number 7. T-55, 1958. The T-55 was essentially a T-54 with improvements. The original turret design tended to deflect rounds downward into the turret ring and was replaced by a more hemispherical frying pan shape with internal mantlet. The turret kept the hemispherical profile that worked so well on late T-54s. Changes were subtle but important. Better welding, revised ventilation, the mushroom dome ventilator was removed on some versions, improved ammunition storage, but the basic hemispherical shape remained because it worked. Protection was excellent. The low profile made the tank hard to spot. The T-55 fought in every major conflict from the 1960s through the 1990s, and that turret design saved countless crews.
Now here's where the story gets weird. You'd think Western nations would have copied this obviously superior turret design, right? They didn't, not really. Let's talk about why and the few exceptions. Number 6. Chinese Type 59, 1959. The Chinese Type 59 was a license copy of the Soviet T-54A. That means it inherited the hemispherical turret design wholesale. China produced thousands of them. Estimates range from 6,000 to 10,000 tanks. The Type 59's turret was virtually identical to its Soviet parent. Same hemispherical shape, same protection profile, same cramped interior. Chinese tankers dealt with the same ergonomic problems Soviet crews faced, but they also got the same ballistic advantages. The Type 59 fought in multiple wars, Vietnam, Iran, Iraq, various African conflicts, and proved the turret design's durability. Number 5. Polish T-54-55 variants. Poland didn't just import Soviet tanks, they produced their own under license. Polish factories at Bumar-Lebendy built thousands of T-54s and T-55s with the characteristic hemispherical turret. Some Polish variants, like the T-54AM and T-55AM, added modifications, improved fire control, laser rangefinders, applique armor. But the basic turret shape remained. Polish engineers knew it worked. Why fix what isn't broken? Poland continued operating tanks with hemispherical turrets into the 1990s. Number 4. Egyptian IS-3M, 1967. Egypt received over 100 IS-3 tanks from the Soviet Union in the 50s and 60s. More than 100 IS-3 tanks had been provided to the Egyptian army, with the IS-3M considered a very dangerous opponent due to its protection and firepower. These featured the original hemispherical turret design from the 1940s. In the Six-Day War of 1967, Israeli forces faced these hemispherical turreted monsters and learned a harsh lesson. The turret design worked as advertised. Frontal penetration was nearly impossible. Israeli tankers had to maneuver for flank shots. Many IS-3s were captured intact, a testament to crew abandonment rather than armor failure.
Number 3. Czechoslovakian variants. Czechoslovakia received IS-3 tanks and produced T-54-55 variants under license. Czech engineers made their own modifications but retained the hemispherical turret concept. Why? Because ballistic testing proved it superior to angular designs of equivalent weight. Czech T-55s saw service domestically and were exported to allies. The turret design, inherited from the IS-3 through the T-54, remained a defining feature. Number 2. North Korean T-54-55 and derivatives. North Korea operates one of the world's largest tank fleets, much of it based on T-54-55 designs with hemispherical turrets. Some estimates suggest over 3,000 tanks with this turret configuration remain in service. North Korea even developed indigenous designs, like the Chonmaho series, based on T-62 upgrades. Many retain turret profiles clearly influenced by the hemispherical concept, though with modifications for local production capabilities. Number 1. The T-62, 1961, the final evolution. The T-62 represents the culmination of Soviet hemispherical turret development. It mounted a 115mm smoothbore gun, a significant upgrade from the T-55's 100mm rifle. The turret retained the hemispherical profile, but was slightly enlarged and refined.
Production exceeded 20,000 units. The T-62 fought in countless conflicts, Middle East wars, Afghanistan, Iraq. That hemispherical turret, refined over 3 generations from IS-3 to T-54 to T-62, proved itself in combat after combat. The T-62's turret wasn't identical to the IS-3's. It was taller, roomier, more refined, but the fundamental principle remained: curved surfaces, maximum slope angles, deflection over absorption. Soviet designers had perfected the concept first seen on the IS-3 in 1945. Here's the question that should be obvious by now. If hemispherical turrets were so effective, why didn't Western nations copy them? The Americans built the M48 and M60 with rounded turrets, but not truly hemispherical. The British built the Centurion and Chieftain with well-sloped turrets, but not hemispherical. The Germans built the Leopard with an angular turret. Why? 3 reasons. First, gun depression. Western tank doctrine emphasized hull-down fighting, hiding the hull behind terrain while the turret and gun remain exposed. This requires good gun depression angles, typically -10 degrees or more. The IS-3's hemispherical turret? Depression was terrible, around -3 to -5 degrees. The curved turret roof physically prevented the gun from depressing further without the breach hitting the roof. Soviet designers accepted this limitation because their doctrine emphasized offensive operations across flat terrain, the European plain, the Central Asian steppes. Western designers couldn't accept it because their doctrine required defensive positions in varied terrain. Second, crew ergonomics. That beautiful hemispherical shape creates a cramped interior. The IS-3's crew complained constantly about the confined turret space. The loader had to work hunched over. The commander had limited visibility. Western nations prioritized crew comfort and efficiency. They believed happy, comfortable crews fight better. Soviet design philosophy accepted crew discomfort as the price of superior armor. Third, manufacturing complexity. Casting large hemispherical turrets requires sophisticated foundries and quality control. Early IS-3 turrets had serious casting defects, cracks, weak points, inconsistent thickness. The Soviets eventually mastered the process, but it took years. Western nations looked at the manufacturing challenges and decided angular welded turrets were more practical for mass production. But here's the irony. By the 1960s and 70s, armor shape was becoming irrelevant. Why? ATGMs, anti-tank guided missiles, and heat warheads. These weapons don't care about armor slope. They punch through regardless of angle. The beautiful ballistic properties of hemispherical turrets became obsolete almost overnight. So what's the final verdict on the IS-3's hemispherical turret design? It was revolutionary in 1945. It influenced an entire generation of Soviet tank design from 1945 to 1965. Over 100,000 tanks were built with turrets directly or indirectly influenced by this concept: T-54s, T-55s, T-62s, and all their variants worldwide. But it was also a dead end. Modern main battle tanks, the M1 Abrams, Leopard 2, Challenger 2, T-72, T-80, T-90, have abandoned the hemispherical turret concept entirely. Modern turrets prioritize different factors: composite armor effectiveness, modular protection systems, crew survivability, sensor integration, active protection systems. The T-72, introduced in 1973, marked the end of the hemispherical turret era in Soviet design. Its turret was flatter, more angular, designed around composite armor rather than cast steel. The T-64 before it had already moved away from the purely hemispherical shape. Soviet designers recognized that the game had changed. Yet the influence remains visible. Look at a T-90 turret. It's not hemispherical, but it retains curves and slopes clearly descended from that IS-3 design philosophy. The DNA is still there, adapted for modern warfare, but never completely abandoned.
Before we conclude, let's acknowledge some tanks that almost made the list. Romanian TR-85. Based on the T-55, it retained the hemispherical turret concept with modern upgrades. Romania continues operating these Soviet-inspired designs. Yugoslav M-84, a modified T-72 produced in Yugoslavia, it moved away from pure hemispherical design but retained influenced elements. Iraqi T-72 Lion of Babylon. Iraqi assembled T-72s built under license with Soviet assistance, featuring turret designs descended from the hemispherical tradition. Syrian T-55 modifications. Syria operated hundreds of T-55s with the classic hemispherical turret, many still in service during the Syrian civil war. Afghan government T-55s. Afghanistan operated Soviet-supplied tanks with hemispherical turrets through decades of conflict, many captured and reused by various factions. These tanks didn't make the top 10 because they're variants or local productions of existing designs rather than distinct developments. But they represent how widely the hemispherical turret concept spread globally.
The IS-3's hemispherical turret wasn't just a design feature, it was a philosophy. It said, we will deflect enemy fire rather than absorb it. We will accept cramped interiors for superior protection. We will prioritize armor over crew comfort. That philosophy defined Soviet tank design for 2 decades. 10 tanks truly embodied this design approach. The IS-7 that perfected it, the T-10 that refined it, the T-54 that adapted it for medium tanks, the T-55 that mass-produced it, the Chinese Type 59 that exported it, the Polish variants that manufactured it, the Egyptian IS-3Ms that proved it in combat, the Czech variants that validated it, the North Korean derivatives that preserved it, and the T-62 that evolved it to its final form. Together, these tanks represent over 120,000 vehicles built with hemispherical or semi-hemispherical turrets directly influenced by the IS-3. That's more tanks than all Western nations built during the same period. The numbers alone prove the design's significance. But here's the deeper lesson. Revolutionary design doesn't guarantee lasting dominance. The hemispherical turret was revolutionary in 1945. By 1975, it was obsolete. Technology changed, threats changed, doctrine changed. The tanks that succeeded weren't the ones with the best armor, they were the ones that adapted to new realities. The IS-3 shocked Western observers in 1945 with its revolutionary turret. 60 years later, no modern tank uses that design. The revolution succeeded, dominated for decades, then gracefully became history. That's not failure, that's evolution. Every T-72, T-80, and T-90 carries traces of that hemispherical turret philosophy in its curves and slopes. The IS-3's design didn't disappear. It evolved, adapted, and became part of the foundational DNA of modern armor design. And that, ultimately, is a more lasting legacy than any single design feature could ever achieve.
If this deep dive into the most influential turret design in tank history grabbed you, that like helps others discover these technical breakdowns. Subscribe to Steel Specs for more detailed analysis of military vehicle design evolution, from concepts to combat to legacy. What design feature should we analyze next? The pike nose hull, torsion bar suspension, autoloader systems? Drop your suggestions below. Every comment shapes future content. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next Steel Specs analysis.